2023 was the second rowdiest silly season in NASCAR history. So how is it that things feel more chaotic now than they did at this point a year ago when Kyle Busch didn't know where he was going to drive and Tyler Reddick had his controversy at RCR? NRF Productions presents the Spotter's Guide predicting the 2024 NASCAR Silly season. In order for this to be as rowdy as 2023, do we have a driver out there that's like Kyle Busch? He's in the exact same position. Well, yes, in fact we do. It's his former teammate, Denny Hamlin. In terms of the on-track performance, Denny Hamlin hasn't skipped a beat. He has 2 wins. He is in the mix for the regular season championship. You would think that Joe Gibbs would have immediately gotten out the feather and the ink to officially give Denny Hamlin the opportunity to sign off as a driver that is going to retire where he started. Instead, Denny Hamlin is in a position like Kyle Busch last year. As we all knew coming into this season, it was going to be a contract year. You'd think it would be a cakewalk with a company like FedEx that has been invested in Joe Gibbs Racing for the last 2 decades. However, FedEx has been in an economic crunch. The FedEx CEO is acknowledging that the US right now is in a major recession. There's a lot of cost cutting, and no surprise that the first thing being cut is the multi-million-dollar NASCAR sponsorship. People say, oh, FedEx is going to be gone. Denny Hamlin's in the danger. However, you can already see it now. FedEx has really scaled back their races this season. In fact, in the last 3 months, FedEx, the primary sponsor of the 11 car, has sponsored just 1 race. Now, this is obviously before the entry list has been released for Daytona this weekend. Things might change. Still, Denny Hamlin has said that Joe Gibbs was going to sign him regardless of sponsorship. This is where I think the root of the cause begins, because there's some reports that Joe Gibbs is trying to restructure the organization. One of the notable things I've seen, and it's most notable with the 11 car, is the way that they're trying to restructure their sponsorship situation, because back in the day, Joe Gibbs Racing they were carried by full season sponsors. Now I've really noticed it where they've kind of went the team sponsor route, where they have Interstate Batteries sponsor every driver and run the same livery. Shingrix, Yahoo, probably Mavis at some point. Joe Gibbs Racing has a lot of now team sponsors that aren't bound down to one driver, that kind of fill in the holes that certain drivers have throughout the year. And so I'm wondering if that's what they're potentially going to do with FedEx, because we've seen FedEx greatly reduce their races. And so if that is the case where FedEx scales back massively, Denny Hamlin doesn't have a primary sponsor anymore. Maybe Mavis is the one to step in, but that's going to be something that could kill Denny Hamlin's chances of wanting to stay at Joe Gibbs Racing. You can continue to do this, but at the same time, Joe Gibbs is probably looking to financial stability, especially when you look at the last couple years with M&M's leaving, FedEx scaling back, and Bass Pro Shops likely leaving when Martin Truex Jr. retires. Speaking of Martin Truex Jr., he's a guy that's kind of hard to gauge, because Martin Truex Jr., he reminds me of someone that just cannot decide where they want to pick to eat for a restaurant. They are just constantly pondering, do I want to go here? Do I want to go there? Martin Truex Jr., same way. He's just constantly in limbo about whether he wants to retire, whether he just wants to step away. Racing, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And then finally, Martin Truex Jr. just randomly says to the media, I'm back, and Martin Truex Jr. is back. So when you consider that you have a driver that is just consistently pondering, do I want to retire, do I not? That's pretty shaky. They're walking on eggshells with Martin Truex Jr. financially. And I think that's why you're seeing Denny Hamlin and Joe Gibbs kind of stall out, because there's other options in the Toyota camp they can go with if Denny Hamlin and FedEx fall through. Hunter Nemechek's name comes up a lot because this is a driver that has the Toyota funding, and he's been on a bit of a hot streak as of late. At one point, he was seen as the guy that was going to replace Martin Truex Jr., but now that his future is set in stone, maybe now he is the favorite for the 11 should something happen to Denny Hamlin. Or if that falls through, Hunter Nemechek can naturally fall into a new role at the Legacy Motor Club. I'm going to conserve my energy on the Legacy Motor Club until November. I mean, this team has just been a mess. They're going to move to Toyota next year, and that naturally is a fit for Hunter Nemechek, a Toyota prospect, and now he can showcase his talents in the NASCAR Cup Series in the number 42 because of the other big news that Noah Gragson liked an under Denny meme and got basically Kyle Larson for it. Look, I'm not even 100% sure that Noah Gragson's going to have a ride for next year because now the cat's out of the bag. Everyone knows Noah Gragson is the guy that got suspended for liking a meme talking about George Floyd's death. Although Black Rifle Coffee might have left the Legacy Motor Club, I checked a tweet from Legacy Motor Club when they posted about Josh Berry saying he's going to drive the Sunseeker car. And if you go back to Black Rifle Coffee's listed races, one of them was Daytona, so they might have already left. Maybe that changed. I haven't checked the entry list yet. But if that's the case, Noah Gragson is going to have a little bit of funding from Black Rifle Coffee, about the same amount he had when he joined the Legacy Motor Club, which is why maybe Colleague Racing makes sense, because Justin Haley has driven the Leaf Filter 31. Although you never know, there might be a bit of gray area because he might have been predominantly funded by the FOE, which is the company that's kind of been backing him for a long time, and maybe they just didn't want to be on the race car. I think it's like some other drivers, including one that I think is another candidate for the 31, and that is Chandler Smith. Okay, so why is Chandler Smith already being talked about for the Cup Series? And that's a good question. Chandler Smith has done decent in Xfinity. He's done his job, but he hasn't really taken that next step. However, with Colleague Racing, I think their number one guy was Austin Hill before he signed the deal to go run RCR Xfinity for another year. This number 31 car doesn't have a long-term driver, and they don't really have the performance to sit there and say that this is a coveted ride. And I blame this on Colleague because the 31 team has not been well structured. In 2022, the crew screwed up not once, but twice getting the wheels on. Trent Owens got suspended for 8 races, including 4 in the early part of the season. And then, yet again this year, Justin Haley, Colleague, trying to get traction. What do you know? They find louvers on the car, and Trent Owens gets suspended for 4 races again in the early part of the season. This is likely the ulterior motive as to why Justin Haley decided to go to Rick Ware Racing. It was a move that stunned the NASCAR Silly Season world. Look at Rick Ware Racing. They've been the bottom 3 in charters almost every single year. They're likely going to be in danger of having NASCAR revoke one of their charters after the end of this year. However, I just point to the strength of RFK. This is an organization right now that is thriving on all cylinders. Chris Buescher won back-to-back races to really make a statement. Brad Keselowski's in the playoffs, and so with their technical alliance with RFK, there's a lot of potential to grow and be that satellite team. And if RFK can start to expand a little more, they put a lot more resources into the Rick Ware Racing cars, eventually they might get to a situation where they're the 3rd or 4th best team at Ford and have some performance. On another side note, Ford, they're incredibly dominant on the super speedway style tracks, and with Justin Haley naturally being a super speedway ace, this seems like home for him. Maybe Justin Haley to Rick Ware Racing is what Michael McDowell was to Front Row Motorsports. McDowell has done so much for this organization since he joined in 2013 for a one-off at Watkins Glen. Those connections and that original first run would lead to Michael McDowell really transforming Front Row Motorsports, winning 2 races and now making the playoffs for the 2nd time in 3 years. It's no surprise that Front Row Motorsports wants him back because this is someone that you want to continue to build around, especially as Front Row Motorsports is now the 3rd best team at Ford behind Penske and RFK, because we all know the strength of RFK. The driver I'm most surprised about is Todd Gilliland because Front Row Motorsports treated him horribly to start the year. It seemed like they didn't learn their lesson. They were willing to throw Todd Gilliland to the side for 6 races so that Zane Smith could get some starts in the Cup Series. I honestly had him ending up at Rick Ware Racing just like Justin Haley, but instead, Front Front Row Motorsports decided that they're committed to Todd Gilliland, and for good reason. You just see it in his stats. He has really elevated the team, and he's the antithesis to the thinking that you need the ABC model, which is, if you guys don't know, back in the day, the ARCA Busch Cup Series model, just completely forgetting the Truck Series because trucks are a mess and all the guys are just so dirty. In the immediate 3 to 5 years, Front Row Motorsports, they made the right decision because Todd Gilliland has some upswing and he's only going to get better as he matures. However, what's going to happen to Zane Smith? If you're Zane Smith, you're in your 4th year in the Truck Series, yet again you're a championship contender. At what point do you start saying, I deserve more than being the top dog on Friday nights? I want to be a guy that races every single Sunday because I have talent. Zane Smith belongs in the NASCAR Cup Series, but where? And that's where things get tricky because at Ford, Penske, RFK, Front Row, the top 3 Ford teams, they're all locked down for the long term. The only other option in terms of a top-level Ford team is Stewart Haas Racing, but can we even call them a top team at this point? Sure, they have 4 cars, but they have fallen mightily from grace. They're reminding me of Robert Yates from 2006 to 2008. Now you have the guy that's carried you for the last decade, Kevin Harvick, retiring, and rightfully so. He's raced for the last 23 years and has achieved almost everything possible to achieve. There's no need for him to race. He's helped Stewart Haas somewhat develop with the next generation car. So out is Kevin Harvick, and in is a driver that I knew was going to replace Kevin Harvick as early as November. Josh Berry fits the Stewart Haas Racing mold. He is a bit of an older driver. He has some Cup experience now, subbing in for Chase Elliott, Alex Bowman, and now Noah Gragson. In Tony Stewart's words, he's not a little rich kid that hasn't worked a day in his life. Josh Berry has worked hard. Josh Berry is what you call old school, and paired with Rodney Childers, assuming they don't split this pair up in the offseason, this is going to be a combination that has the potential to really take off, hit the ground running, barring of course that Stewart Haas doesn't further completely collapse off the face of the earth. That's why I don't think Zane Smith wants to be at Stewart Haas Racing. You see them going the way of Robert Yates, DEI in 2008. If you're Zane Smith, do you really want to potentially become like Aric Almirola, where he signs a developmental contract to be with DEI all those years back, and then the team just can't find sponsorship, and now he has to repiece things together? Ironically, Aric Almirola would be the driver that Zane Smith would replace should he decide to be at Stewart Haas Racing. I'm not going to lie about Aric Almirola. He strikes me as a driver that just wants to be in the show. You have to take into account being a NASCAR driver, it's a profession that has a lot of respect and a lot of title to it. It is something that helps pay the bills and can really afford an above average lifestyle. And I think Aric Almirola sees running in the NASCAR Cup Series that way. That's my honest opinion based on how he's performed this season and how he's been in and out of retirement, even as he's not been the driver he once was. But because of the Smithfield money, that gives Stewart Haas Racing the ability to fund the 4-car organization in a more competitive way. This is where the dilemma comes in for Stewart Haas Racing, because while you have just some money coming in to put Aric Almirola and keep him in the 10 car, at the same time, do you really want Aric Almirola to continue to be in the limbo, potentially retire after 2024, and yet again see the Stewart Haas Racing roster change for what, the 7th time in 8 years? Stewart Haas Racing is trying to be like Hendrick Motorsports, and now you have to try to figure out what are you going to do past Aric Almirola. You need to find a driver that has some Cup experience, but at the same time can fund the bills. This is where I bring in the Wood brothers, because they have a driver, Harrison Burton. He hasn't really performed up to expectation. He has been abysmal in that 21. For as much hate as Matt DiBenedetto got, at least he made the playoffs. At least he had opportunities to win. Harrison Burton has done nothing, and yet his future in that 21 is solidified because of Dex Imaging. Or it could potentially get better if Aric Almirola retires, Stewart Haas Racing sees Dex Imaging and Harrison Burton's experience and decides, kid, you're going to drive the number 10 car. which in return would leave the Wood brothers without a driver and without a sponsor, and thus Ford might decide to take matters into their own hands into who is going to be the replacement for Harrison Burton in 2024, should all of this happen and Aric Almirola indeed retires. Finally, I want to touch on the Chevrolet. Hendrick Motorsports isn't changing. They have their roster solidified for the next 5 to 7 years at least. Alex Bowman was the one guy that was in limbo. Everyone always talks about Alex Bowman as the driver that's easily replaceable. He doesn't deserve to be in the 48. I think that's a big disservice to Alex Bowman because he's made the playoffs ever since he's been at Hendrick Motorsports, except likely 2023. He's won a race from 2019 to 2022, and I think if you just get the consistency right, Alex Bowman is going to have himself a William Byron-like season where he finally clicks. It's not going to happen this year, but 2024 with Blake Harris or Alan Gustafson, I think Alex Bowman can be that guy. Then you've got Trackhouse Racing, which, by the way, to add more salt in the wound of Stewart Haas Racing, Trackhouse Racing has stolen the Anheuser-Busch money, so for 18 races at least, they are going to sponsor Ross Chastain. I already mentioned it, Ross Chastain and Busch Beer, perfect match. Ross Chastain is going to be a guy that is probably going to have a little bit of a soft spot in NASCAR fans' hearts, and with most beer drinkers and NASCAR fans being more on the conservative side of the spectrum, he could be the guy that mitigates the gap between Anheuser-Busch and the whole Dylan Mulvaney controversy. I mean, you're already seeing it with Kid Rock drinking Bud Light in Nashville, so maybe they're going to be back, and Ross Chastain, at least in NASCAR, is the driver to do so. Meanwhile, Daniel Suarez is back, and what I've got to say on that is it's good for Daniel Suarez to have some room to develop. He is going to be here through at least 2024. Yet at the same time, I'm going to be honest, Daniel Suarez needs to step it up because the disparity between the 1 and the 99 this season has been pathetic. The fact that Daniel Suarez is going into Daytona in a must-win situation pretty much, that says a lot about Daniel Suarez with him making so many mistakes, and Trackhouse to an extent. They need to get it together, especially considering the fact that they have a driver that could potentially set the NASCAR world on fire, and that is Shane Van Gisbergen, someone that I didn't even know who the fuck he was until he went into Chicago and just completely stunned everyone. His experience with V8 supercars has led him to take a new path in life to officially try to pursue the NASCAR Cup Series. He has gotten out of his deal to run the supercars for the future, so now he is deadlocked on making a NASCAR Cup Series career for himself. That is likely going to be Trackhouse, and while he's not going to be on the Cup Series program running the full-time schedule, so I think the valid way up the ladder for SVG is going to be running trucks full-time in 2024, likely replacing Carson Hocevar before in 2025 should he master the Truck Series. He moves up and potentially replaces Daniel Suarez in the 99. That's why I say Daniel Suarez needs to perform in 2024. There are no more excuses. So now it's time to predict the NASCAR Cup Series silly season. This is the fun part. Just saying where everyone's going to be and then looking back and seeing how everything is completely wrong. So it starts out, the major transitioning begins with the number 10, as I think that Aric Almirola is finally going to call it quits. I think for Stewart Haas Racing, the thing they need to do is just cut their losses with Aric Almirola and start fresh and new for 2024. And the driver that's going to bring in the money is Harrison Burton. Dex Imaging, they're going to fund a decent amount of races. Therefore, Harrison Burton is going to be your new driver of the number 10. Justin Haley, meanwhile, is going to drive number 15 for the Ford camp, which is going to make a major decision now that the Wood brothers have an open seat, and that is going to be that Zane Smith is going to drive the 21. I don't know exactly what the sponsorship situation is going to be. However, Ford might step in to replace the Dex Imaging sponsorship. They work some other things out. Maybe Zane Smith has some funding, but I think for Zane Smith, if he just gets an opportunity at a decent team, one that's not falling off a cliff like Stewart Haas Racing, he can thrive. And so Zane Smith, I think, is naturally going to be a driver that is going to be a good fit for the Wood brothers. And next season, he could be someone that gets top 15s, top 20s, and is in the playoff battle, unlike Harrison Burton. So as for this second page, I wanted to put Noah Gragson in the number 31. He has a history with Colleague Racing, and that might make things easier, but at the same time, I think they're just going to go with Chandler Smith in the number 31. Chandler Smith is a driver that has potential and has less baggage, and I think that's what they're going to go with. The only other big move is Legacy Motor Club. Hunter Nemechek is going to drive the number 42 because Denny Hamlin is going to stay in the 11. With Denny Hamlin, there's just not a lot of other great options, and I think Joe Gibbs is just going to say, Denny Hamlin, like, we can't afford to lose him, even though we're trying to rebuild and transition. And that's why I think Denny Hamlin, even with a lot of the funding issues, he's going to be in the 11, and that's going to open up the door for Hunter Nemechek in the 42. And one other thing I forgot to address, Jimmie Johnson comes back for a part-time schedule, although I'm going to be honest, I think Jimmie Johnson should run one more full-time season now for the Legacy Motor Club. This is a complete hot take, and yes, I know he made the Hall of Fame, but I don't know. He needs to have that farewell tour. Considering how 2020 ended, the only thing he has to lose is, of course, his life and maybe his health if he gets wrecked or has an issue like that. But other than that, there's just something in me that wants to see him pull an Albert Pujols and do one more year and just absolutely come back on a tear. Although you never know. Maybe he comes back and he ends up completely like Adam Wainwright and can't even run in the top 25. So there it is, the 2024 NASCAR Silly season. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the other great NASCAR content that this channel has to offer. And other than that, this is Nathan for Digital Gashouse. Life's a beach and then you drive.